What is it like to fight in a war? To be in your 20s and have to take a gun and defend your country? This is what hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian boys and men have had to do. And in this rare interview, one young Ukrainian soldier tells his story of what it's like.
The only thing I could hear, just like in video games, was my heart beating. That's the only thing I could hear.
And remembers the moment he and his fellow soldiers were trapped.
So when their armored vehicles started firing at us, we had very little to fire back with.
Eventually being captured by the Russians.
And the first thing that the Russian military ordered me to do was carry all the dead guys out of the bunker because they didn't want to do it.
And he tells me what kept him going while he was in captivity.
Every evening, I said a prayer to God that I would be released as soon as possible.
My name is Colm Flynn, and this is an interview with Ukrainian soldier Yevgeny Bondarenko. What age were you when you joined the Ukrainian army?
24.
24?
Yes.
Why did you join?
Срочна служба.
Because of urgent service.
You felt that urgency. What did you feel?
Я відчув нічого.
Nothing. I was simply called up for conscription. I had no choice. That's the law.
Такі правила.
Did you want to go?
Yes, of course.
Why?
Because my father served and my grandfather served the state as well. So I felt I must serve too.
What did you think when the war broke out?
Що я подумав, то я взагалі...
I didn't understand at all why this had all started, because our two countries had very good relations. So I couldn't believe that it happened, but it did happen. So I was surprised, and I admit I was a little bit frightened too.
And when the war broke out, what did you have to do? Were you sent to the front line? Were you sent into a neighborhood in combat? Where did you go?
Я знаходився у своїй частині.
I was stationed near Kyiv, and we had really only one mission, and that was to stop the Russians so they didn't enter the capital. We were stationed around 25 kilometers from Kyiv.
Цих росіян, щоб вони не підійшли до Києва.
How close did you get to the enemy, to the Russians? Did you see them coming down the street? I mean...
Of course.
Yes, of course. We had very close contact with them. Our first combat took place around 1 or 2 kilometers away. So we saw each other, saw their equipment, and knew that they could see us. My very closest encounter was probably around 10 to 15 meters from the enemy.
Were you based in a tank or in an armored vehicle, or where were you fighting from?
Окопи, звичайно.
We were in the trenches, fighting back with guns and grenades.
Most of us, we have no idea what it's like. But for you, what is it like to be standing there with a rifle, shooting other men, them shooting at you? What is that like?
Спочатку це дійсно відчуваєш.
At the start of the war, you don't want to kill another person. You feel this fear, because you see them and yes, he is just an ordinary person, like any other person. But when you realize that your life is in danger and that person could kill you, then you're afraid of your life. So you have no choice, and you shoot.
Ті, що тобі загрожують.
Yeah, that must be a strange moment when you're looking at the Russian soldier and he looks just like you. Young guy in his 20s, probably frightened like you as well, and you're both holding guns, pointing at each other. What goes through your mind at a time like that?
В той момент у мене ніяких немає думок, тому що...
Well, at that very moment, I didn't have any thoughts, because everything happens so fast, and usually I'm shooting from our Ukrainian position into the Russian position. So when I look up and see them running, it's hard to know if I hit them or not, or what happened to the person. This is how the battle goes. I just shoot and that's it.
Я просто стріляю, та й все.
Before you went to war, I'm sure you had an idea of what it might have been like. Maybe you played computer games as well. But what surprised you the most about being in that situation and it being real?
У мене була ситуація, та що відбувається.
Actually, there was one event that was like a video game. We were surrounded by Russian tanks who were shelling us, and so we're forced to go into our bunkers. The Russian military threw grenades into the ventilation system, and they started to explode.
У вентиляцію нам закидували гранати.
I got contusions from these grenades, and I couldn't hear or feel anything for literally 10 seconds. The only thing I could hear, just like in video games, was my heart beating. That's the only thing I could hear.
До речі, странні речі, але я пам'ятаю їх у відеоіграх.
Do you remember the first time you had to kill somebody?
Я ж вам кажу, я не знаю, чи вбив якось, чи ні, тому що...
Well, I don't know if I killed someone or not, because when we exchanged fire, we couldn't see. We just fired in their direction. When I had my last battle, the one where I was captured, the Russians told us that we had killed a lot of their boys, and so they wanted to execute us. They said that we killed their brothers, but I don't know.
Втратити.
How did you get captured, you and your fellow soldiers?
Під час останнього мого бою до нас на...
Well, it was during this one particular battle, a very large number of Russian tanks entered the position we were. This was outside of Kyiv. There were around 10 or 15 tanks, and also special military cars and special equipment. Following all of them, there were around 500 to 700 Russian soldiers. In my unit, there were only around 100 to 120 people, and we didn't have enough weapons. So when their armoured vehicles started firing at us, we had very little to fire back with. So we were forced back and retreated into our bunkers. And on our radios, we started to hear that a large part of our group had already died, around 30 men. There were many others wounded, and we had to carry them into the bunkers with us, which slowed us down. The battle went on for almost 7 hours. And as I said, we were outnumbered and outweaponed. A woman then came into the bunker. She was a Ukrainian senior lieutenant. She told us that at this stage there was no point in fighting anymore and that we should all surrender. So I was one of the first who left the bunker and was taken prisoner. And the first thing that the Russian military ordered me to do was carry all the dead guys out of the bunker because they didn't want to do it. So I took out the corpses of brothers with other comrades. Then they made us all go on our knees. They mocked us, made us say that we are supporting Russia. They shot right next to my ears so that they would ring. Then they took us to Russia.
І так я потрапив в полон, поїхав до Росії.
What was going through your mind when you had to carry out your dead fellow soldiers and then go on your knees in front of them? What did you think?
Коли я вже здався в полон,
But when I received the command to surrender, I somehow felt relieved. Because before that, I had felt a very large dose of adrenaline in my blood. I was working like a robot. But when I knew that we were surrounded and there was no way out and that I could die in the next few seconds, my mood suddenly dropped. But I didn't know what to do because there were so many wounded and dead guys around me. So when I was given the opportunity to surrender, I knew I would be a prisoner in Russia, but I thought at least I would be alive. So right at that moment, my soul felt a little calmer.
То трошечки на душі мені якось спокійніше стало.
When they brought you to Russia, then, what was that experience like? Where did they keep you and how did they treat you?
Цей досвід, на жаль...
Well, this experience was really so hard and so difficult that I wouldn't want anyone to go through it. Because when they brought me to Russia, they brought me to an ordinary prison where there were already ordinary prisoners. They forced me to strip completely naked, took everything from me, all my belongings. They gave me the usual prison clothes and sent me to a cell where you just have to wait and you've no idea what's going to happen to you.
Поки щось з тобою станеться, ти не знаєш, що з тобою станеться.
What was it like in that prison when you were in your cell with the rest of the soldiers and the rest of the people?
У в'язниці були тільки військові.
Well, this prison housed not only Ukrainian soldiers but also civilians, mostly from the Kyiv region. I think there were maybe around 700, but we had no communication with anyone at all, only the guys in our cell. These were the same guys I was locked up with every single day. And for the first 2 months, there was still stuff to talk about. But then after that, you just don't know what to talk about anymore. And you start to go a little crazy.
Навіть не знаєш вже, про що розмовляти, в тебе просто їде криша.
And did you have any communication with your family or with the outside world? Did your family know where you were? Did you know if they were safe or where they were?
Не було змоги ніякої.
No, we were not allowed to communicate with our family at all. My family had no idea what was wrong with me or where I was. I was simply counted as a missing person. So every day, the only contact I had with the outside world was looking through my windowsill. I just watched how the birds would fly and how the weather changed.
Міняється погода, все.
How were you treated when you were in prison? For those couple of months, when they had captured you and you were in your cell, how were you treated as a person?
Я знаходився у тюрмі майже рік.
I was in prison for almost a year, and we were all treated the same, being mocked every day, from morning to evening, being forced to say different things, making us sing the Russian national anthem every morning. And we had very poor nutrition, very poor nutrition. Some of the boys lost 40 to 45 kilograms each. And when they interrogated us, if we didn't give them the information that they were looking for, they would just beat us badly. At one stage, they broke my fingers and also gave me electric shocks.
Електрошокери.
When they're interrogating you, what are they trying to find out? What information are they trying to elicit from you?
Ну, по-перше, вони на допросах питають.
Well, in all interrogations, they asked me where I'm from. Then they started asking if I use other weapons, such as NATO ones, or if I studied abroad for military work. When I told them I didn't, they said I was lying and started beating me. So I would just make up stuff, so they would beat me a bit less. They also asked me if I killed any of my own brothers. They asked me if I killed any Ukrainian civilians or even raped them. Of course, I didn't. And they also asked me if I saw Nazis in Ukraine. I said no, but they said, how could that be? Because they'd come to liberate me from the Nazis. Then they just kept mocking us.
Ну, і не тільки мене, всіх інших хлопців знущалися з нас.
When they were beating you and they were interrogating you, how was your mental health? And when you were sitting in that cell for months, like you said, with nothing to talk about with your fellow soldiers, just looking out the window, not knowing what was happening at home, how were you psychologically?
Ну, спочатку до нас.
In the beginning, in the first months, my psychological state and that of my boys was very bad. We kept thinking that we were going to be sent to cut down forests in Siberia. That's what they kept telling us. So I thought that was going to happen, or that I was just going to die. I would be brought somewhere and killed. But as time went on, I started to regain control of myself psychologically. I started to cope better.
Ставало на душі.
How do you do that? How do you keep your sanity? But more importantly, how do you cling to hope at a time that seems so hopeless?
Ну, по-перше, це будь-які сни.
Well, first of all, I would dream about my family and my girlfriend. And it's those dreams that you have at night. You start to understand that these people need you, and you need them too. And with each day that passes, you sort of get used to the conditions that you're in. When I got used to these scumbags, I somehow became indifferent to them, and I started to believe in life again.
Просто в життя.
Do you pray to God? Do you believe in God at a time
Yes,
like
of
that?
course.
But you say, of course, but would you think, God, why did you put me here? Why am I in this jail? I don't know if I'm going to live. I don't know if I'm going to die. I don't know if I'll see my family or my girlfriend again. God, where are you?
Да, я постійно запитав.
I used to pray every night. I constantly asked God, why am I here? And before that, I almost never prayed. But when I got there, every evening, I said a prayer to God that I would be released as soon as possible. Because I really wanted to see my family again, or at least hear some news of them. So that's why I prayed every evening.
Я молився кожен вечір, да. Все.
Do you think God heard your prayers?
Yes, of course he did. If I'm here today, then he heard me.
How did it come to be that you were released from the prison and returned to Ukraine? How did that happen?
В один із днів.
One day the boys and I were about to have lunch. And then the special forces and prison workers suddenly broke into the cell. They named a couple of last names, and mine was one of them. They told us to leave and take our things. We went out and were thoroughly checked. And then we were sent to another cell where we changed into uniforms, but not ours. These were the uniforms of the boys from Azovstal. That's the steel plant in Mariupol. They were very dirty and must have been in these bags for around a year. They smelt so bad. Then we were taken by bus to the border with our hands tied and eyes covered so that we couldn't see anything. And right on the border, our hands were untied and we were exchanged for boys from Russia.
So you were released as part of a prisoner exchange program?
Yes.
Мене поміняли так.
What was that moment like when you were released off the bus, you were back in Ukraine?
Це вже було, я відчув, коли я
I raised my head and looked up to the sky and thought, wow, I can do this. Because when we were in captivity, we had to keep our heads down. If I raised my head even a little when I was captured, they would hit us. But now I could breathe fresh air and talk to other people. It was amazing.
З іншими людьми це вже було щось чимось.
Would you say that you're a different person now than the person you were before you had this experience?
Так, звісно, цей досвід.
Yeah, I think my experience of war has made me more courageous. Before this, I did have fears, but now I'm not afraid of anything.
You're still serving in the army today, and the war has been going on for 2 years, longer than most people expected. No sign of it ending anytime soon. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think it will end when it does end?
Я, звичайно, вірю в перемогу.
Well, of course, I believe in our victory and that we will liberate our borders, but unfortunately, I don't know when this will happen, or even how it will happen. Because every day, everything changes. There are counterattacks from one side and the other, and I don't know how long it will last. No one knows this.
І я не знаю, скільки це все буде тривати. Це ніхто не знає.
Many people I've met while I've been here in Ukraine seem to have a different attitude than they did when I first came here 2 years ago. At the beginning, everyone was saying, we will be victorious, there's no other way. And now with the heavy casualties, the fact that many say that the Ukrainians are far outnumbered by the Russians, they're wondering that question, actually, how will we win this war? Do you have any idea of how the war would be won? Would you ever consider for your country a sacrifice, a negotiation, or giving up of land, or what? What does victory look like?
Ну, я вважаю, що наші кордони мають бути віддані.
I believe that our borders should be put under our control. But there, in the regions that have already been captured, most people are convinced that Russia will not go anywhere, and they will remain under its control. That's why sometimes I wonder whether we need these areas, or whether it's better to resolve all this through peaceful negotiations and perhaps just leave everything as it is now, just so there is no more war.
Але щоб війни не було.
I know that here in Ukraine at the moment, one of the big controversial topics is conscription. Even in Parliament, they're talking about a new bill to widen the range of who can be brought to war. When you look at, who is sent to fight, who's given a pass, the government are saying they need far more men. You've seen firsthand what it's like on the front line. You've seen the terror, the horror of it. You also see the small victories when they didn't get into Kyiv and places that were captured can be liberated again. What do you think of this topic of who should fight and who shouldn't? Do you think you need more of your countrymen, more boys your age to go to war?
Я вважаю, що ті хлопці, які знаходяться там, вони...
I think the guys that are out there on the front lines, they've been there for a very long time. They deserve a break and have the right to be replaced. I know a lot of guys who have small children that they've never even met because they've been fighting all this time.
У мене є побратим той, що приїхав додому, і його донька називала...
I have a friend who came home and his daughter called him uncle instead of dad because she didn't know who he was. So, I do think it's necessary to mobilize new people, even ones without experience, because everyone can, even in a short time, be taught something. It's all done very quickly.
Швидко робиться. Але Якщо людина до цього не має бажання,
But on the other hand, if a person really has no desire to fight and has no experience at all, then I don't know why we'd even want him. Because we don't need people like that on the front line. They don't help in any way. All they do is simply hide during the battles. They become a burden because you still have to be responsible for their life as well as your own.
Тому що тобі ще потрібно відповідати за його життя, помимо свого життя.
If we meet again in 2 years, what will we be talking about?
Я вважаю, що ми сядемо за стол.
I believe that we'll sit down at a table and we will drink to victory.
Ivan, thank you very much.
No problem.